All right, we're back. I fixed the yellow color. I don't look so yellow. I don't look so ill anymore. So we're finishing develop as an ethical reasoner. Then we get to the next one. I'm excited about that. How to detect media bias and political propaganda. Very, very relevant. Always relevant, really. But 250 year celebration, July 4th, a lot of talk about the Constitution, Declaration of Independence. What kind of government do we have? Insurrections and all that stuff, right? So that's a very topical chapter subject. Then we get into fallacies, also very interesting. That's errors in logic. So that should be good. Learning and using information critically and ethically. Critically, ethically, also important. And then that's so important. There's two chapters on that. So a lot to cover, a good 50 pages or so. Strategic thinking, also a couple chapters, and then that's it. And that's all she wrote. So we're getting there. Hang in there. Just a couple more subjects, topics. Let us return to the relationship of ethics and social conventions. For more than 100 years in the United States, most people considered slavery to be justified and desirable. I was just watching a documentary on Thomas Jefferson last night and slavery and the Constitution and how everyone is born free and equal, except unless you're poor of a particular minority or women back in the day, before that all changed. So it's interesting to see that. And there's a whole organization that came about to try to not really expose, but to try to convey the truths about Jefferson and his slaves and the treatment of slaves. So interesting stuff. Anyways, it was part of social custom. There could be no question that all along this practice was unethical. Moreover, throughout history, many groups of people, including people of various nationalities and skin colors, as well as females, children, homosexuals, individuals with disabilities, have been victims of discrimination as a result of social conventions that are treated as ethical obligations. Yet all social practices that violate ethical principles deserve to be rejected by ethically sensitive, reasonable persons, no matter how many people support those practices. Very true. And even though slavery was very common 250 years ago or so, there were still people that I think, even if you were practicing slavery and profiting from it, many, I'm sure, knew it wasn't good, wasn't right. But it was so much a part of the culture that it took some time to not only end slavery in total after the after the Constitution was written. It took another 70, 80 years before African Americans and blacks received their political rights. They may have been freed physically with the Emancipation Proclamation, but it wasn't until 100 years later, 1964, 1965, the Civil Rights Act, Voters' Rights Act. And those acts were actually based on amendments, the 13th and 14th Amendment, that were supposed to be adhered to and followed, part of the laws of the land or the Constitution. But as most things go, laws, just because it's a law doesn't mean that people are going to follow it, right? So that's another thing to keep in mind. Even to this day, there are constitutional laws being broken by the president, by governors, by state legislatures. Just if you're not aware of this, just keep your eye on the news and you'll see these breaches of the law occurring now and again. Unless we learn to soundly critique the social mores and taboos that have been imposed upon us from birth, we accept those traditions as right. There you go, right? All of us are deeply socially conditioned. Therefore, we do not naturally develop the ability to critique social norms and taboos effectively. That's key. Schools and colleges often become apologists for conventional thought. Faculty members often inadvertently foster the confusion between convention and ethics because they themselves have internalized the conventions of society. Education, properly so-called, should foster the intellectual skills that enable students to distinguish between cultural mores, and ethical precepts, between social commandments and ethical truths. In each case, when conflicts with ethical principles are present, ethical principles should rule. And also, as regards education, education should not just be a place of indoctrination of a particular angle or perspective, right? In my critical thinking classes, I don't teach any particular moral or ethic or political leaning. I leave that. That's up to the individual. Critical thinking is for the individual to decipher, decode, and discern what is right and what's wrong, how to go about it, right? You're not to be indoctrinated with one particular dogma. Remember, we talked about dogma, that being dogmatic, that which is dogmatic, basically hard and fast rules and principles that are not to be debated, basically dogma, right? So I'm not dogmatic in the teaching of critical thinking. I teach what's going on. I teach critical thinking, and I also have my students take a look at what's going on out there politically, socially, educationally, and so forth, and let them do the decoding and the seeing and the inferring. I will even have my students read textbooks from the left and from the right and from the center, right? You tell me what the difference is. Why is there a difference? Should there be a difference? Does a difference cause problems? Is one side more correct than the other? Okay. That's what freedom of speech is, freedom of thought. That's what liberty is. It's it's enabling the individual to freely and subjectively determine, decipher, decode, discern what's actually going on, right? Cultural diversity derives from the fact that there are an unlimited number of alternative ways for social groups satisfy their needs and to fulfill their desires, right? Unlimited, that's the key word, right? Unlimited number of ways. So that's endless, seemingly endless, right? So that's a lot of leeway. That's a lot to play with, right? Traditional ways of living within a social group or culture take on the force of habit and custom and are handed down from one generation to another. So that's what I'm talking about. That's what I've talked about when I talk about your point of view, right? How are you seeing things? What's your filter? Whenever I say that, I think like a filter fish, but that's sorry. I always have word association going on in my brain. What's your filter? Where do you come from culturally, politically, religion wise, if so, right? Or not religious? Are you a atheist? Are you an agnostic? Are you of a particular religion, right? Are you dogmatic about it? It's all there. So a lot going on, a lot to be filtered through, right? To the people in a given group, these customs seem the only way, there it is, or the only reasonable way, right? I gotta highlight that. Yeah, so there's your dogma, right? The only way or the only reasonable way. And if you're thinking as of a member of another social group, economic group, political group, you're not of the right group, you're wrong, right? And unfortunately, as the book has said, as the authors of your text have said, I should say, that that causes problems, right? Um, you really got to keep an open mind. You can't have the mind closed. It's difficult to do. Not easy, right? Much easier to shut it down, shut the mind down, just yell at people, scream at people, pull out the fists, go to war, right? And these social customs sometimes have ethical implications, right? Social habits, customs answer questions such as how should marriage take place? Who should be allowed to marry under what conditions and with what ritual or ceremony? And should that be actually should that shouldn't be left up to the government, right? The government's got to stay out of that, right? Who should care for children? Should the government step in there? Maybe if the children are don't have parents, they're parentless, they're foster children, or the children are being abused, then the state services would step in, right? How should children be taught about improper ways to work? And if you're on the internet at all, you'll get all kinds of opinions. You should not, or even animals, animals should not be picked up like that, treated like that. That dog, cat, bird, whatever seems unhappy, sad, depressed. Right. So, and again, these are people who are looking at a video, very short videos, usually half a minute long at best, oftentimes. And they don't know the people, they don't know the animals, they don't know the situation, but they're jumping in there, guns a-blazing, you know, both feet, and they're coming up with an absolute judgment or insight or solution, even, as if there may not even be a problem, right? So my suggestion is, unless the people are asking for help or seem to be in dire straits, uh, stay out of it. That's kind of how things work, right? Don't tread on me. Isn't that the old uh, philosophy from uh, colonial days, right? Don't remember it was a picture of a snake. Don't tread on me. Don't mess with me. Leave me alone. I'm a free person. I'm not governed by the state. I don't have a dictator, right? When should children be accepted as adults? When children develop central when should children, excuse me, trying to take three. When children develop sensual and sexual desires, how should they be allowed to act? How should they be allowed to act? That's kind of a strange way to phrase it, right? But when sensual and sexual desires appear, um, what's the procedure? What should you do, if anything, right? Or should you just be quiet and monitor? Or maybe discuss. I don't know, you know. Uh, with parenting, there's not just one parent, not just one way, right? So good things to think about. How should men and women dress? To what degree should their body be exposed in public? I've seen comments about women online. It's usually women. I don't see too many men exposing themselves. Well, on occasion, but that's another another point. Um, but with social media, Hollywood, the common thing is women exposing themselves more than not being conservative, right? And a woman was wearing, she wasn't, the guy said half naked, but she was pretty much covered up, maybe shoulders showing, midriff or something, and the rest pretty well covered. And the comment was, why do these women, Hollywood, I'm guessing it was, right? Why do these women, these entertainers, Hollywood women, why are they always naked? I said, I said, man, she's almost, fully covered, just a little bit showing. I wouldn't say naked. So people love to overreact. They love to stir things up. How should food be obtained? How should it be prepared? How is the society stratified into levels of power? If society develops enemies or is threatened from without, how will it deal with those threats? What sorts of games, sports, amusements will be practiced? What religions are taught and all that good stuff, right? So these are social habits and customs, right? And what does the law, the land, the Constitution say? You it pretty much says, it's up to you. It's up to the parents. It's up to the people. Aren't the people sovereign? So the people really have the choice, right? If they're children underage, then the guardians or parents should have choice, right? They should not be dictated to by the state or by other parents. I used to hate that when my kids were young and other parents would kind of, sneer and say things under their breath. It's terrible. I never did that. Never did that. I hated it when it happened to me, and I said I'm not going to do it to anybody else. It's just terrible. Schools traditionally function as apologists for conventional thought. True. Those who teach often inadvertently foster confusion between convention and ethics because they themselves are unable to distinguish the two. They have internalized the conventions of society, yet education, properly so called, fosters the intellectual skills that will enable students to distinguish between social customs and ethical precepts, between social commandments and ethical truths, right? So there you go. Okay. That's where you want to go, right? What are the social customs and what are the ethical precepts, or how should one think or be ethical, right? And then between social commandments, if there is such a thing, and ethical truth, right? So there's the social and then kind of the inherent ethical precepts and truths, right? Most people would know that if an adult approaches a 10-year-old and the 10-year-old does something wrong and the adult just smacks the 10-year-old across the cheek or something. In most cases, most cultures, most of the time, people will say, no, that's not right, especially if it's not the parent, even if it is the parent, but worse so if it's not the parent, right? So we kind of have internal, like internal clocks. We have internal ethics, internal morals, right? If I said that all people wearing blue shirts should be hit with a stick and all people wearing red shirts should be given $10, you'd go, what? That's crazy, but that's kind of what we do sometimes, right? Ethically. When social beliefs and taboos conflict with ethical principles should prevail. There it is, right? That's the big one. Like, for instance, in some cultures, women aren't allowed to vote still to this day. They are not allowed to drive. They are not allowed to work. If a woman does something wrong, then the husband can hit the woman in some cultures. And I mean, you do that in the United States, any of those things in the United States, it's not going to fly, right? So here's some examples. Many societies have created taboos against showing various parts of the body and look down upon or punish those who violate them. Many societies have created taboos against giving women the same rights as men. Many societies have socially excuse me. Many societies have socially legitimized religious persecution. Many societies have socially stigmatized interracial marriages. Many societies have socially isolated, harassed people of other ethnic backgrounds. These practices seem ethically obligatory to those socialized into accepting them, but those who accept them would be wrong, right? I mean, as I'm reading through, or as we're reading through, it just, all of those struck me as no, 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 right? Ethics, sexual taboos. Social taboos are often connected with strong emotions. People are often disgusted when others violate a taboo. Their disgust signals to them that the behavior is unethical. They forget that what is socially repugnant to us may not violate any ethical principle, but instead may merely differ from social convention. True, and I've seen that. I've seen that play out many times. Social doctrines regarding human sexuality are often classic examples of conventions expressed. Let me get this. Conventions expressed as if they were ethical truths. Social groups often establish strong sanctions for unconventional behavior involving the human body. Some social groups inflict unjust punishment on women who do no more than appear in public without being completely veiled. I've heard the punishment for that is death, or if not death, some type of uh, serious punishment. Yeah, incarceration, imprisonment, beating. An act considered in some cultures as indecent and sexually provocative. Sexual behaviors should be considered unethical only when they result in unequivocal harm or damage, right? So by just not wearing a veil or being covered up well enough, it's not causing any immediate harm. So to go to the extreme to beat or incarcerate or to kill a woman who is not wearing a veil or who is not totally covered goes way, way beyond. It's like skipping several steps. And I don't even think, even if the woman exposes herself and corrupts some men and has sex with those men and those men are married, does that still even uh, require a punishment of death? Again, that's very extreme. So, but if you're not of that culture, if you're not of that culture, if you're of that culture, I should say, you might accept it more. It's just something I grew up with. I'm comfortable with it. You may even feel that it's wrong somewhere within you, but you've been exposed to it, or at least the concept of it and the thoughts of it and what to do and the punishments therein. You've been exposed to it so often, so pervasively over such a lengthy period of time that it doesn't seem as bad as those who are not exposed to it at all, and then they see it appear in their culture, right? Um, so those are difficult situations to say the least. Frequently, the harm comes not from sexual behaviors themselves, but from indoctrinating people, as I was saying, into believing that arbitrary rules of sexual conduct are to be understood as the right way to view sexuality and behave sexually, right? Arbitrary rules of sexual conduct, right? That's the key phrase. Ethics, political ideology. Political ideology provides an analysis of the present distribution of wealth and power and devises strategies in keeping with that analysis that provides either a justification of the present structure of power or a critique. It seeks either to protect and maintain the way things are or to change them. It seeks to change things in small ways or big ways. It compares the present to the past and both to a future. It projects. Conservative ideologies justify the status quo or seek to a return to a previous ideal time. Liberal ideologies critique the status quo and seek to justify new forms of political arrangements designed to rectify present problems, right? Um, that is a little bit of a difference between conservative and liberal. Um, and as far as return to a previous ideal is concerned, it depends on what time you're talking about. If you were alive in the United States in the 50s and 60s, you're not returning to any previous ideal. That was the ideal of the time, right? And if you know how society works, it usually, with society, it's usually swinging left, swinging right. You know, we get too far right, too conservative, and then we compensate, overcompensate, too far left, and then we compensate, overcompensate, and it keeps swinging back and forth. So there's no, it's kind of like time. Time is not linear. It loops in upon itself, right? So society, social norms are not linear. They loop. You know, there's kind of a back and forth, a back and forth. So keep that in mind. You really, oh, there was some of my students, or you hear it, not even my students, but in popular culture, there's a lot of talk about how there is great division. There is great division between the parties, and they act like it's never happened before. I'm watching the documentary on Thomas Jefferson, and back in the day, and the historians were saying, and there was great division between the parties, right? Between the conservatives, but between the right and the left, right? So much so that it, led to violence. It led to war, eventually, civil war, right? So don't think that, and by comparison, um, the type of acting out or rebelling or confrontation or friction going on now, much less than it was back then. So people, you really got to get a hold on, that's something they don't teach in school, right? I don't know why. Or if they do, it's not taught properly. You really got to get a hold of how people function sociologically, psychologically, um, as individuals. And this book does a good job at giving you some of that information, but you got to get into the psychology. You got to get into the sociology, read about that stuff, right? Uh, because understanding people is critical. If you get too caught up in the present and think that what you're seeing now is so much worse or so much better or whatever than the past, you're right and you're wrong. It's been better at times and it's been worse. It goes better, worse, better, worse, right? So people really need, that's why I think to a great degree, people say, you ask people why study history, and they'll say, oh, so we don't repeat the same mistakes. Well, we keep repeating the same mistakes. The reason why you study history is to understand how people think and how people function uh, sociologically as a group and as an individuals, right? Uh, Maybe if we did that, then we might be able to, if we've got a better perspective on things, then we might be able to better stop things from repeating. But until people understand how people are, how people function as a group socially, and how people function as individuals psychologically, we ain't going nowhere. Nobody's learning nothing, right? Reactionary ideologies plead for a radical return to the past. Revolutionary ideologies plead for a radical overturning of the fundamental corrupt structures, right? So right now, you've got the conservatives or the Republican Party, make America great again, and then of course you've got the left, which says let's break it all down, uh, blow it up, restructure it, reform it, and that's done before. There's been revolutions, and What's interesting about revolutions is that the oppressor, who is the government or the group in charge at any given time, whenever that oppressor is taken down, the oppressed eventually become the oppressors. So you got the oppressed, the revolutionaries defeat the oppressed, revolutionaries, the oppressed get in, um, are in charge, and then after a while they start to oppress, right? Why is that? Well, people are people, and people are easy to corrupt, right? Conservative ideologies consider the highest values to be private property, family, God, and country. Liberal ideologies historically have considered the highest values to be liberty, equality, social justice. There you go, refer to the social justice warrior, right? And more equality, down with the rich, the wealthier the problem, equal distribution. You got your democratic socialists, right? So it's nothing new. It's like I've seen this picture many times before. People think they're so on point or so much on the edge of a new thing, and it's just old school, been there, done it, did it. So political viewpoints based in ideologies from one side to another have highly significant ethical implications. Put into action, they often have profound effects on the well-being of people. What is more, hypocritically, the ideologies officially espoused by politicians often differ widely from the personal ends they pursue. Oh, yes, 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 there it is, right? So if you think politicians are all sacrosanct and all about the people and they're ethical and moral and they want to do it for the people, think again. Because most politicians are in their minds, in their heart, in their pockets, in their bank accounts, they're beholden to where the money is. Most politicians are not wealthy business owners, wealthy investors, right? They're politicians. They work the body politic, right? So they need money. So in order to get money, they have to get funding. And in order to get funding, you have to do what the rich people want. And what the rich people want is often almost diametrically opposed to what the average person, poor or middle class person wants. Never mind wants, but needs, right? So you really got to understand what's going on. Please, please, please. Just, I think ignorance of the ways of humankind and our blind spots and our points of views, limited points of views, not understanding other points of views and pervasive differing points of view and really what's going on, and that we live in all these matrices. We live in a political matrix. We live in a health matrix. We live in an education matrix. There's a period. A matrix is basically a situation, a social situation where people believe something is happening, but what is really happening is going on underneath, and it's quite different from what we see at the with our eyes, right? Like in the Matrix. The people in the Matrix believe that they're living in a home, that they're eating food, that they're waking up and sleeping in a bed, that they go off to work, that they're in a car driving, they go to work, they have a job, they have friends there who look certain ways, right? But meanwhile, they're actually plugged into a machine, like a battery, and all their brain is plugged into this virtual reality, which is a matrix, which is basically probably just a AI app or maybe a uh, self-learning type of program, right? I think that's what algorithm, self-learning program. That's what in the first Matrix, Agent Smith is talking about when he finally captures Morpheus, and he's explaining to Morpheus that we programmed the Matrix actually to have a perfect society. And you people, you humans rejected that, right? So the algorithm eventually built it up towards towards a more perfect, uh, paradisical type of society, right? Nirvana. But the humans rejected it. And he says, well, and we realized that you people are the problem. You can't accept uh, that which is best. You always have to go below it, live and reside below it. And then you repopulate and you spread and you doing all this, he says, you remind us of one thing. You remind us of a virus, right? A disease that spreads, right? And that analogy really blew me away. Anyways, virtually all political ideologies speak in the name of the people, yet most of them, in fact, are committed to powerful vested interest groups. Didn't I just say that? Vested interest groups who fund their election campaigns. The same people often end up ruling independent of the official ideology. There it is. I just said that. Believe me, I wasn't even reading ahead. I don't think I've read this chapter, to be honest. As I was telling you guys in the video before, I said that I teach this class in, on campus and during a 17-week semester. And I'm lucky if I get up to chapter 10, 11, 12. So I've read through this, but it's been quite some time. But there it is. But if you know it, you know it. If you know what's going on, you know it, right? So there it is, right? Most of them, in fact, are committed to powerful vested interest groups who fund their election campaigns. The same people often end up ruling independent of the official ideology. Thus, in the post-Soviet power structure, many of those who were formerly powerful in the Communist Party are now among the most prominent and acquisitive neo-capitalists, right? So that's what happens. Yeah. So the vanquished are vanquished, and then the vanquished become vanquished. Is that the proper terminology? I don't know if I'm saying that right. But the oppressed take down the oppressor, and then the oppressed move in, take over, and become the oppressors. It just goes, it's like a cyclical, right? We learn history so that we learn not to repeat the same mistakes. Yeah? Well, nobody's learning anything apparently, right? Bottom line is that politicians frequently fail to act based on ethical reasons. Thank you very much. So if you think your party or politician of choice, I was listening to it's a documentary. It's a recent 6-part documentary on. I just finished it last night. There was another one that was talking about America, the Great Experiment. And then there was another 5 or 6-part document on Jefferson. And the one I was watching, I think it was Jefferson, the last one. And some politicians came on, like Cruz and Hillary Clinton, and they're talking about these things, the uh, law of the land, the Constitution was to preserve the right of the people. The right people are sovereign, and to thwart any oppression from government, from the executive, or even the legislative, judicial, even judicial. Judicial is usually not a problem, oddly enough. Oddly enough, the judicial usually does what's right. It seems to be, when are people saints? Not that they're right all the time, but I can tell you, I've been following politics for closely for 25, 30 years now. And the judicial generally does what's right. I don't know how that works or how that happens, but they generally do the right thing. They're not, at times they lean one way or the other. And I think that happens more at the state level, but at the federal level, they're generally amazingly well. And there was one judge of the 9, I forgot who it was, Thomas, I forgot who it was, maybe it was him. And he said that, you know, you may have the laws, the law of the land, but the real laws lie in the hearts of the people, right? That's key. And that's why I said that even constitutional law and other laws are broken, right? But what's interesting is when you break constitutional law, the people who are breaking the law are administering and passing law, right? So how do you arrest yourself for doing that, right? You're the lawmakers and the law keepers and the law maintainers. So if you break the law, what higher power is there to step in, right? So it's a very convoluted situation. Anyways, that's why it's very difficult. Um, and the body politic politicians are really tied into the wealthy, and the wealthy have a lot of power, and usually what the wealthy want, what the wealthy say, the wealthy gets. And the politicians are really like the gatekeepers. What would you like, sir? Like, what is that movie that has the gatekeeper? The Ghostbusters, right? There's a gatekeeper, right? And he's got the keys to the gate. And that's that one person, the gatekeeper. I can't remember his name. Rick Moranis, I think, played was he the gatekeeper or the gatekeeper assistant or something? I forget. I'm not up on my Ghostbuster plot and theme. But anyways, gatekeepers, right? So the politicians are the gatekeepers. Gatekeepers don't have money. They really don't have much power either, right? The power resides in the dollar. The millionaire used to be millionaire, now it's billionaire, now it's trillionaire, right? With Musk being the first trillionaire. So it's the billionaires and the trillionaires who really control things, right? Who started the Federal Reserve? The six wealthiest people on the earth, right? Three in the United States, three in Europe, right? And they started the IRS. Why did they do that? Well, they wanted a way in which they could manage their money, keep their money, and maintain and build money, right? The IRS, the Federal Reserve, was created by our government. Woodrow Wilson signed it into being, right? But it's run like a private business. The board of directors, those on the board are private citizens, right? So, and according to what I've heard, that even the president of the United States doesn't know what's really going on. That's why some politicians are saying that we need to monitor, or what's the word, edit? What's the word when the IRS comes in and takes a look at the books, whatever that is? They need to go in there, right? And really check and see what the Fed is doing, but that's never happened. All right, that hasn't happened for audited. We need to audit the IRS. The IRS, the IRS is part of it. IRS was created at the same time the Federal Reserve was created. How are you going to pay for stuff? Well, if the government's going to take out money and the Federal Reserve doesn't have money, Federal Reserve doesn't have money. If you think it does, think again. Read some books, right? The money comes, it's borrowed. It's monetized debt. It's borrowed. And pay checks are cut from the U.S. Treasury and put into existence. And how are those? How is that borrowed money paid for? Well, it's paid through bonds and it's paid through taxes and other means, right? It's not the where Federal Reserve doesn't have money. The banks don't have money. Do you know this? The banks don't have money. Where does the money come from? Well, it comes from us. When we take out a loan, a car, a house, or whatever, a home, then we spend money, we pay off that loan. That's where the money comes from. Banks don't have money. They can give us a loan, and we pay for it, and then eventually there's money. But banks don't have money. How about that? Read about that. Struggling against each other for power and control, political movements and interests. My mouth is not working well today. That's because it's Friday. I've been teaching all week, and my mouth is about to expire for the week. Often sacrifice ethical ideals for practical advantages. They often rationalize unethical acts as unavoidable necessities, like, for example, forced on them by their opponents. And they systematically use propaganda to advance vested. Oh, this is it right here. So the next chapter on the media and propaganda and BS, that's going to be great. You got to understand how stuff works. If you think, the Democrats are all angels or the Republicans are all angels or certain politicians are angels, there ain't no angels, especially in politics. Not that they're all bad. Some are good for sure, right? But they basically do what those in charge want them to do. Research has been done on this, and about 90% of the time, decisions are made or things are done by politicians that don't please the people, but their base. As who was it? George Bush Jr., George W. Uh, is it George W? Yeah, George. He was talking to a group of people that goes, my base, which means my wealthy donors, right? It's all it's all very corrupt, It seems to be all of one thing. And you'll notice in some cases, not with Trump, but with the the Obamas and the Bushes, they're very tight. You notice that? Like George and Michelle are great buddies. Isn't that weird that Democrat and Republican get along so well? Trump is definitely a rogue entity because he's got blank you money. I can't say the word. Yeah, F you money. He's super wealthy, so he doesn't have to adhere to things and he can kind of function relatively independently in that regard. As a student interested, still can't go against uh, Congress and can't go against the courts, right? Those checks and balances will keep the potential king, if you think presidents of the United States can become kings. They can't really because their powers are very restricted and limited. They can write executive orders, but that only lasts for their term. They can certainly do things that are unethical and immoral, break the law, but they can get impeached, they can get arrested. They're going to be out in 4 years anyways, right? Or 8 years. And if they're screwing up, they're not going to be there 8 years. So at best, they're in there 4 years. So people running away or leaving the country because of some president's in power, I go, just wait a few years. He's going to be gone. What are you going to do? Run away every time there? If I ran away every time there was a bad president, I wouldn't be living in the United States most of my life. Anyways, as a student interested in developing your ethical reasoning abilities, you should be able to differentiate ethics and the law. What is illegal may or may not be ethically wrong. True. All depends on the case. What is ethically obligatory may be illegal. What is unethical may be legal. There's therefore no essential connection between ethics and the law. There you go. Let me do this. Let me do this. That's the big point. That's the one we gotta have stand out, right? Look at that. That's very important. There is no essential connection between ethics and the law. Right. Laws often emerge out of social conventions and taboos. How about that one? Right? You had laws as Martin Luther King will tell you in a letter from Birmingham jail, there were laws in Third Reich Germany during World War II that opposed the Jews, and there were laws in this country, Jim Crow laws and other laws that opposed blacks. And there have been laws put on the books that oppose different socioeconomic groups or individuals, or um, um, I was going to say ethical, or race based. It could be based on race or social status or economic status or political status. Who knows what, right? So laws often emerge out of social conventions and taboos. And because we cannot assume that social conventions are ethical, we cannot assume that human laws are ethical. True. What is more, most laws are ultimately made by politicians who routinely confuse social values with ethical principles. There you go, right? As we have said, their primary motivation is, except in special cases, power, vested interests, or expediency, getting it done fast, right? So politicians, their primary motivation, remember this, uh, except in special cases, power, vested interest, like how invested are you, right? If I'm not invested in it, I'm not interested, I'm not going to vote on it or move in that direction. Right? And expediency is get it done. For example, from 1900 1930, American politicians in response to an electorate dominated by fundamentalist religious believers, here you go, I know what's coming up, passed laws that made it illegal for anyone, including doctors, to disseminate any information about birth control. Oh, I thought they were going to talk about uh, outlawing liquor. What was that? The 12th Amendment? I forgot what it was. But they did it for a long time. Uh, like church groups and very conservative groups thought that alcohol was causing a lot of evils in society, right? So they outlawed it, right? Can you believe that? Alcohol being outlawed. Now, not only is alcohol not outlawed, they're starting to take away laws on drugs. Like in California and other states, you can smoke pot and who knows what else is gonna. See what I mean? Swing left, or I'm sorry, that was right. Swing right, very conservative, then back to the middle, now overcompensate, swing very far left. I'm not kidding. That's how things generally go, right? Just gave an example, just stumbled upon an example right there, right? So the abolitionists abolish, get rid of the slavery, but also get rid of drinking. Abolitionists were very conservative, right? The consequence was predictable. Hundreds of thousands of poor and working class women suffered severe injury or death from the effects of illegal drugs and unsanitary abortions. So there you go, right? So as for outlawing alcohol, what happened? Well, you got a lot of organizations like speakeasies opening up where you had to have a password in order to get in, where alcohol was being sold. Alcohol was being made in private or home distilleries, and people were driving it around the country in really fast cars. That's where stock racing first came from, right? That's where if we didn't have stock racing, we might not have ended up having NASCAR, right? The first fast cars or souped up cars were those that were modified to be able to outrun the police with their booze. Like what was that? Starsky and Hutch maybe kind of had some of that on that TV show, but there was another one with came movies that came out in the 70s. My generation. Burt Reynolds. I think he was like a booze runner. He had a very souped up car, and Jackie Gleason was the cop, and he was always chasing Burt. You know, crazy stuff. So know your history. To criminalize behavior that goes against social conventions is one of the time-honored ways for politicians to get elected. There you go, reelected, right? So they love it when certain behaviors can be criminalized, or they can point at certain. So politicians aren't really about solving problems, but maybe even manufacturing problems or pointing to problems like gun control. Gun control. If you're worried just about people dying, then guns are very only about 1% of the population. Every year, 3 million people die, right? On average. Most of those die from hypertension, heart problems, or cancer, right? The number of people dying from is tragic. Any death is tragic. Gun deaths are tragic, of course, but I think it's less than 1% of those 3 million. Look it up. Look it up for me. Less than 1% or 1% or less or so die from homicides or gunshot wounds, right? But that is great for politicians because they can, use that in their campaigns. I promise to incorporate stricter gun laws across the states, across the country. Da, da, da. Now, if you really want to stop people from dying, probably the better thing to do is to get people to eat better and to work out more. So what are you going to say? You're going to run on that? I promise to campaign to make you eat better and to work out more. That just that not it's not as sexy. That that's kind of like a slow death. If you're not exercising or eating, it takes a while. And it's also not very clear cut. There are other factors involved. It's not just diet and exercise, but there's also heredity, age, how much you eat, and so forth. But guns, boom, very instant, very obvious, right? If somebody has a gun, they shoot and kill. I'm going to stop that from happening, especially on school campuses. Save our children. See, that's how politicians roll. That's how they function. If they really cared about deaths, then they would go to Congress and say, "Hey, shut down all the fast food places. Um, you know, make sure everybody has a membership, gym membership, and that they work out 3 days a week, or else they're going to be fined by the IRS or something, right?" Many sexual practices have been unjustly punished with life imprisonment or death. Many societies have enforced unjust laws based on racist views and so forth, right? I've been kind of belaboring. Where am I still? I'm still that far away from that. Yeah, I got to start moving forward a little more quickly here, or else I'll be here 2 hours. Acts that are unethical. For an action to be unethical, it must inherently deny another person or creature some inalienable right. The following classes of acts are unethical. You can read through these. These are pretty obvious. Slavery, genocide, torture, racism, sexism, murder, all those, right? It is important for you to develop your ability to determine for yourself whether any belief system, practice, or rule of law is inherently ethical. Two kinds of ethical questions. It can be either simple or complex. Simple ethical questions are either definitional in nature, easily answered through applying an undisputable ethical principle or set of principles. Complex ethical questions, on the other hand, require one to reason through more than one ethical perspective and come to reason. Ethical judgments, right? And I'm not going to get too much in it. Now we're getting, as I said, this book covers way more than it should. Now we're getting into the deeper stuff, right? I want to keep it light and airy. Complex ethical questions. What was that before? Uh, yeah, simple ethical questions. So again, you can read through this at your own leisure, right? A hypothetical example of reasoning through a complex ethical question. This is just an example. So again, I'm not going to go through, I don't go through the examples, but I'll pause that for you there. And there it is. I'll just leave that for a second. So now you can pause it and read it and take a look at that in more detail. And here's more of it. This excerpt includes 3 strategies. This reasoning is not complete. So I think we're understanding our native selfishness. That's one we got to get into. In addition to the above, ethical reasoning requires command over our native tendency to see the world from a self-serving perspective. This can never be talked about enough. And I was going to say, we already talked about it. There it is, chapter 11, right? On human irrational tendencies, focuses on the problem of human self-centeredness at length. Here we apply some of the major points to that chapter to problem and ethical reasoning, right? So again, we've already gone over this. This is just rehashing what we've already gone over in a little more detail in this chapter. So again, I'll leave you to your own devices. I've gone on too long as it is. I must give you a break before you fall asleep or stop viewing the videos altogether, right? To become skilled at ethical reasoning, we must understand that it means doing what is right, even in the face of powerful, that's the thing. I like that phrase, powerful, selfish desires, right? So our selfish desires are so powerful. I think our selfish desires, I think, are the foundation of our laziness. We have such selfish desires that it's difficult to overcome doing the right thing, which requires us to get out of ourselves, out of our selfishness, and see what the real problem is, leave ourselves behind, and work on the problem more ethically and look at things from other people's perspectives. less selfishly, right? So, and that just came into my mind at this moment. So that might be the crux of the biscuit or the core problem there, right? Three types of character: the uncritical person, just kind of unconscious, unconcerned; the self-serving critical person. You're self-serving, but at least you're aware of critical thought or deeper thought. Then you're not only aware, for fair-minded person, you're not only aware, you're applying your thought ethically and morally, right? Rationally, in a good way. Are we done? Conclusion. To develop as an ethical reasoner, you must deeply internalize the fundamental roots of ethics. This means learning to identify and express ethical concepts and principles accurately. It means learning how to apply these principles to relevant ethical situations and to differentiate ethics from other modes of thinking that are traditionally confused with ethics. So that's a nice little conclusion right there, right? When reasoning through an ethical issue, you should be able to state your reasoning in detail, explaining what ethical principles seem relevant to the issue, why. You should be able to prove that you have given serious consideration to alternative perspectives on the issue and demonstrate that you are not ignoring other reasonable ways to think. So you really have to, again, you have to get outside of yourself. You have to think logically. You have to think comprehensively. You have to take in the full picture. You have to not just think of, your way, your point of view, your culture, your whatever, right? You really have to get outside yourself, I guess is right. Finally, to reason well ethically means taking command with intellectual humility of your native egotism and sociocentrism. Without such an organized, well-integrated, critically based approach to ethics, some counterfeit of ethics, but not ethics itself, is likely to result. All right, so that's it. Have a good day.